Stay tuned for the After the Show show.
Thank you, guys, and good morning, Fox's Alert. The big moment is almost here. Fired FBI Director James Comey will be in that room, screen left, before the Senate Intelligence Committee 1 hour from now. But the testimony before the testimony already rocking Washington, D.C. 7 pages of sometimes vivid details in the Trump-Comey saga that tease up what could be an afternoon of fireworks on a critical day ahead in Washington, D.C. As we say good morning in New York City. This is special coverage of the James Comey testimony here in America's Newsroom. Good to have you with us. We'll find out together what we get today. I'm Bill Hemmer. Good morning, and Shannon, good morning to you.
It's going to be a great day. I'm Shannon Bream. Today's hearing caps off a long drama. It's going to be former FBI Director James Comey's first public testimony since he was fired by President Trump on May 9th. His written testimony already zeroing in on repeated encounters with the president, including a statement by President Trump that he hoped Comey would back off the Flynn probe, as well as a demand for, quote, honest loyalty.
So here is a segment of the 7 pages. Mr. Comey detailing the moment in a memo during a January dinner at the White House, saying this: the president said, I need loyalty. I expect loyalty. I did not move, speak, or change my facial expression in any way during the awkward silence that followed. We simply looked at each other in silence. He then said, I need loyalty. I replied, you will always get honesty from me. He paused and then said, that's what I want, honest loyalty. I paused and then said, you will get that from me, end quote.
Okay, so 7 Republicans, 6 Democrats make up the Senate Intelligence Committee. Democrats are expected to press Comey to provide more details about his closed-door meetings with the president and whether there is any evidence of obstruction of justice, while Republicans may try to poke holes in Comey's account of his dealings with the president.
So we have for you a jam-packed hour. Brett Baer, Chris Wallace, Dana Perino all standing by with analysis this morning. But we want to begin inside the room where it all happens. Our chief intelligence correspondent, Catherine Herridge, is there. And Catherine, let's start there. Good morning.
Well, good morning, Bill. There's an extremely excited vibe to the room behind me as security makes the final preparation for James Comey's arrival here on Capitol Hill. And based on his prepared testimony, which reads very dramatic and will probably be even more dramatic when he publicly presents it, there were 9 conversations between James Comey and the president over a 4-month period. And James Comey felt so uncomfortable about those interactions that he documented each one, something he says was not his normal practice. And he describes one episode where he started taking his notes in an FBI vehicle outside of Trump Tower. There are many things to talk about in the prepared testimony, but let's take a deeper dive on this Oval Office meeting in February that focused largely on former National Security Advisor Mike Flynn, who had just resigned after lying to the vice president about his connections and his contacts with the Russian ambassador Sergei Kislyak. And according to the prepared testimony, Comey says the president declared to him, I hope you can see your way clear to letting this go, to letting Flynn go. He is a good guy. I hope you can let this go. And then Comey continues, it was very concerning given the FBI's role as an independent investigative agency. The FBI leadership team agreed with me that it was important not to infect the investigative team with the president's request, which we did not intend to abide. We also concluded that, given that it was a one-on-one conversation, there was nothing available to corroborate my account. And at that time, they elected not to brief the Attorney General Jeff Sessions on the matter because he says they figured he would ultimately recuse himself, and they didn't see any point or any utility into going to the Deputy Attorney General at that time because he was in an acting position, Bill.
Why did President Trump go to other intelligence officials, Catherine? What's our understanding right now?
Well, what I learned through my reporting last night from a source who's been very close to these discussions is that after that first initial meeting in January with the FBI director and then incoming President Trump, and he was told that he was not the target or the focus of the FBI investigation. As the months passed, the president became increasingly frustrated that this was not public, especially after the FBI director said in March in this very public hearing on the House side, the Intelligence Committee, that there was this counterintelligence investigation that was looking at contacts between members of the Trump team and Russian officials and the meddling. And it was at that point that the president went to the National Security Director, Admiral Mike Rogers, and the Director of National Intelligence, Dan Coats, and said, give me some help here. Like, try and go to Comey and get him to make this information public about me, that I am not the focus. It was not, I'm told, an effort to kill the entire Russia probe, which is also corroborated by James Comey's prepared testimony.
All right, a lot more to go through, as we will in time. Thank you, Catherine Harris,
You're
leading
welcome.
our coverage there on the Hill. Shannon.
All right, joining us now, Republican Senator James Risch of Idaho, a member of the Senate Intelligence Committee. He was there asking questions yesterday. He'll be back today. Senator, thank you for making time for us before you head into the hearing room.
Thank you very much, Shannon. If you think the traffic's bad in Virginia, you should see the traffic in the Dirksen building with people trying to get into the hearing.
And probably not a camera in sight, I would imagine.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, okay, so I want to play a little bit of what we heard at yesterday's hearing as sort of a setup for today. And you're part of that conversation, so let me play that and we'll talk about it.
I have never felt pressure to intervene or interfere in any way.
I have never been directed to do anything I believe to be illegal, immoral, unethical, or inappropriate.
I understand your answer. I'm disappointed with that answer, but I may indicate, and I told you I was going to bring this up.
With all due respect to my colleague from Virginia, I think you have cleared up substantially your direct testimony that you have never been pressured by anyone, including the President of the United States, to do something illegal, immoral, or anything else.
All right, so your colleague across the aisle, who is the ranking member there, Senator Warner, seemed to indicate that he didn't feel like he'd gotten good answers from the folks who testified yesterday. Is it settled for you from what you heard yesterday?
Well, it's certainly not settled. This is an ongoing investigation by the Intelligence Committee that's been going on for some time. And I think what's lost in all this is that this hearing today is part of that. It was decided to do it publicly to try to answer some questions for the American people. Again, with all due respect to my good friend and colleague from Virginia, Mark Warner, he wasn't listening. Those guys said very directly, very clearly, that they had never been pressured by the White House or the president or anyone else to do anything illegal, immoral, or unethical. Now, they don't want to accept that. I know that. But it was crystal clear what those guys said.
What will be your number one question for former FBI Director Comey today?
Yeah, you know, with all due respect, I'm going to hang on to that till we get in there, and in about an hour. You only have to wait about an hour for that. But
we'll be watching.
Look, he's laid out his testimony, and I think that he's done an outstanding job in those 7 pages of putting together what the American people want to hear. And I suspect both sides are going to focus on that and talk about what's in those 7 pages. I mean, it is not legalese. It's not hard to wade through. It's plain English, and he should be commended for that.
What do you make of this fact that a lot of people read through it, and it depended, a lot of times on what channel you were watching or who you were listening to, because both sides were sort of claiming victory over this thing and saying it's sort of like Comey in that he provides ammunition for both sides, but then doesn't make a conclusion. He leaves it there for folks who are reading to interpret and decide as they will. Do you think overall it was a positive or negative for the president?
Well, I think you've hit on something that's a problem in America today, and that is particularly with the national media. The various networks hear what they want to hear and report it the way they want to report it. I think after the hearing today, we're probably going to be able to drill down on that considerably, and the American people are going to make up their mind, and when it's all over, there will be people on both sides of this, I'm sure.
Do you see, in what we've seen in the testimony today, and again, you're going to have an opportunity to question further today, any evidence of a case for obstruction of justice by this president?
You know, I'm going to talk about that today in the hearing, so I'm going to hold that until then. But on top of that, I really ought to be careful about that because I don't know where our investigation's going to go. I'm a prosecutor, a former prosecutor. I've been through thousands of investigations. This is not unfamiliar territory to me. I'm looking forward to getting through this and writing an accurate report that the American people can read.
Are you confident you'll get answers today that may conclude or resolve some of these outstanding issues?
I think we already have, but I think it'll be clear today.
All right. Senator Risch, we thank you very much for making time for us. And listen, as we say in the business, teasing ahead, you've done that. So we are going to be watching, as we would anyway, for your upcoming questions. Thank you, sir.
Jan, and this story doesn't need a tease.
It doesn't. Thank you, sir.
Let's bring in three of our best this morning. Brett Baer, anchor of Special Report. Chris Wallace, anchor of Fox News Sunday. And Dana Perino, co-host of The Five and former White House press secretary under President George W. Bush. And it's great to have all three of you with us today. Dana, ladies first.
All right.
Former press secretary Ari Fleischer said the following to the Wall Street Journal. There should be two goals for crisis control for the nation's chief executive. Don't make it worse and refocus the nation on a different topic. Go inside the West Wing today, Dana. What is the strategy for the executive there?
Well, since 1995, I have followed the advice of Ari Fleischer. It's excellent advice, but it's a little bit conventional, and this is an unconventional time. You have a president today with a very light schedule. So he's got a little bit of a speech later. I think that the White House could actually provide a counter narrative. Last night, you had his attorney, Mr. Kasowitz, who is the outside legal attorney advising on this, putting out a statement saying that the president feels completely and totally vindicated. I would actually leave it at that. I don't know if that will actually happen, but I do think there's something else that the White House could do today to follow on Ari's point, which is that because they are worried about media bias, they could actually today do something unscheduled and take the president to visit a construction site, a local school, a local business. Remember, this is supposed to be Infrastructure Week, and provide a different picture, a different story that shows that he is out there doing the work that his voters expected him to do and that he is not worried about this hearing. That would be good advice. I don't know if they will do it, but this is all part of the, the dramatic hearing that you have today follows on the dramatic firing of James Comey, and so the Congress is going to want to have a bite at this apple. I don't know what's going to be left after this hearing, because yesterday was a little bit undramatic.
We have seen his schedule, nothing on it until 12:30 Eastern time today. He'll make an appearance there with a group of conservative leaders in Washington, D.C., and we'll give a speech around 12:30 Eastern time. We'll certainly have coverage of that when that happens. To be a split-screen opportunity for all of us watching this. Brett, let's go to you now. James Lankford, the senator from Oklahoma, he's on that panel. He asked questions today for a minimum of 7 minutes to start, as the others do as well. You had him on your program last night, and Martha had Lindsey Graham on last night as well. This is how Graham characterizes what he knows about the case for obstruction of justice.
In the minds of Special Counsel Mueller, there is no obstruction of justice case to be made, because if he felt like he had a case, he wouldn't let Comey, his chief and only witness, go out in public and get beat up.
On that point, it's important to remember, Bob Mueller's doing his own thing right now. So what have you learned so far today based on Lankford's conversation last night and what we can expect?
First of all, Bill, good morning. I think there's a couple points here. One is that the most important figure here, believe it or not, is Bob Mueller. He is, we're told by sources, that has gone over this testimony with Comey and kind of approved it. So in essence, you are getting a sense of that investigation, even though you're not seeing it firsthand. Two, Lankford, other senators, depending on which side of the aisle they are on, they're talking about this obstruction of justice question, saying what is inappropriate and what is obstruction of justice. Jonathan Turley, who's well respected on both sides of the aisle, said that if this is true and President Trump said what he said and Comey said he said, it is, quote, wildly inappropriate. However, talking like Tony Soprano doesn't make you Tony Soprano. And I think that that is the line that you're going to be seeing in this hearing. It's also important to point out that we've had months now where we've had leaks after leak, excuse me, and we haven't seen substantive collusion evidence. So now the shift is to an obstruction of justice case. One senior aide, FBI aide, said it would be farcical for Comey to have told President Trump that he was not under investigation. Comey said it 3 times in the testimony released yesterday.
Chris Wallace, you've seen a number of events throughout your time in the nation's capital. 45 minutes out. Where are we on this today?
Well, I think we make a bit of a mistake, if we talk solely about the legal aspects of this. There's also a political aspect of this, and you've often seen that in hearings. I was looking back, some of these I witnessed, some of them I read about. Go back to the 1950s in the Army McCarthy hearing, where Joe McCarthy, the senator from Wisconsin, was pushing the idea that there were communists in the Army, and the lawyer, the counsel for the Army, Joe Welch, famously famously said, "Have you no sense of decency, sir?" And the air went out of the McCarthy investigation. Go to Watergate and John Dean talking about the cancer on the presidency, and Alexander Butterfield talking about the secret taping system. Go to the famous hearing, the confirmation hearing for Clarence Thomas for the Supreme Court. Anita Hill made a very impressive performance, but in the end, Clarence Thomas turned the tide when he called it a high-tech lynching. Oftentimes, this doesn't come in the opening statement. It doesn't come in any kind of prepared remarks. It comes in the give and take of a multi-hour hearing. But they could have a dramatic effect, not always legal, but tremendous effect politically. And I think we have to watch for that today. The president's numbers are already very low. Latest Quinnipiac poll, he's down in the mid-30s. There may be no hard evidence of an obstruction of justice, but this still could be very damaging to the president, as James Comey, who is a very experienced, very savvy, and very dramatic witness on Capitol Hill, tells his story. And you got to remember, he got fired by Donald Trump. He has no interest at all in protecting the president. He has primarily an interest, my guess is, in redeeming his own reputation.
Dana, I want to bring you in and ask you, because obviously we have separate branches here and they all have different jobs to do. All eyes across the country, and I dare say many across the world, are focused on this hearing today. But there's still business to be done at the White House. How frustrating is this when you're trying to push an agenda, trying to have a message, trying to be cohesive, but you have a very real issue that you have to deal with over in the legislative branch, a number of investigations in this hearing that's sucking basically all the air out of the room today?
Well, this is just the nature of the White House. I'm pretty familiar with, especially after the Democrats took over Congress in 2006 when they won in that midterm election. The next 2 years were really difficult for us in the White House because the Democrats just wanted to haul us up for hearings all the time, and you're trying to continue an agenda. Right now, the president benefits from having Republicans in majority in the House and the Senate, but that doesn't mean it's going to be easier. So these are just the cards that you're dealt with at the White House. And so I think that they are doing the right thing. They basically have several different things today going on this week. They're talking about the fact that in the next 8 weeks, you can expect in the Senate that a health care bill will be introduced and voted on. They actually said that yesterday. You're going to have a debt ceiling bill. This was supposed to be infrastructure week, and even though we haven't seen too much of that because of this coverage eclipsing it, there's actually stuff. It's happening out there. Yesterday, Mike Pence, the vice president, meeting with health care, people that are concerned about the health care situation in this country. So they are going about their business the best that they can. I do think that the statement last night by the lawyer, Mr. Kosowitz, saying that the president feels totally and completely vindicated, shows that the White House wants to basically take the posture that we are not bothered by this. I don't know if that will continue because, as Chris was saying, this is a very perilous time for the president because you see some of that support slipping, not from his core supporters, but the strongly approve. That number is starting to slip a little bit, and there's some big legislation that's coming up, and there's not a lot of focus on it on the Hill, at least on the media side of things. But underneath, the Republicans are moving forward at a fast clip. And I think that the Democrats, because they're very focused on this Russia issue, are ceding a lot of policy ground on health care, on the debt ceiling, and on tax reform, which will definitely be taken up in the fall.
Yeah, and one of the loudest voices, most strident that we heard yesterday, most passionate, was Senator Warner, who is the ranking Democrat on this committee. Brett, we have a little bit of a look at some of his statements that we'll get from him today. We've got a bit of a preview. And after going through the 7 pages of what we will see from Comey in his opening, Warner said, I do want to emphasize what is happening here. The President of the United States was asking the FBI director to drop an ongoing investigation into the President's former national security advisor. He continues, in further violation of clear guidelines put in place after Watergate to prevent any whiff of political interference. The president then called him on 2 different occasions to talk about this cloud that lingered over him. It seems like the way that Comey has laid this out, you can interpret that 2 ways. And it looks like it's going to split on party lines.
I'm pretty sure it will, Shannon, and I think that hearing yesterday is very indicative of it. And you just talked to Senator Rich, who made the point, with all due respect to my colleague from Virginia, you're not listening to these intelligence officials that are saying, I have never felt pressured to stop an investigation, to get in the middle of it, to do anything immoral or illegal, yet they wanted to know the specific conversation that each one of them had with President Trump, something that those officials were not willing to do. How willing hearing is James Comey to get into it? Well, I think just by the dramatic writing that we've seen in the prepared testimony, the fact that he was down to, the grandfather clock on the wall and his facial expressions at certain moments, I think you're going to see some pretty interesting testimony today, well beyond the prepared testimony that we've already received.
Chris Wallace, the president's done a lot of interviews. He's been asked a lot of questions that relate to this. I'm just going to play one for you. This is May 11th, NBC News and Lester Holt when he said the following.
I said, if it's possible, would you let me know, am I under investigation? He said, you are not under investigation. I know that I'm not under investigation, me personally. I'm not talking about campaigns. I'm not talking about anything else.
We're going to go through all these comments as we continue our coverage here, and we're going to look at the testimony that James Comey's about to deliver. And he says over a period of 4 months, they had 9 interactions, I do believe, 3 in person, 6 on the phone. And based on the testimony that was released yesterday in written form, he detailed 3 in person and 2 by telephone, which would seem to indicate there are 4 other encounters that we have not heard from. Is the math right? And is there a certain mystery that's behind that?
I didn't know there was going to be math on this test bill, so I'm a little upset about that.
Give it a shot.
I will say this, that when Donald Trump in his letter firing Comey said, and thank you for 3 times telling me that I am not under investigation, a lot of us skeptics, cynics in the press corps said, I don't believe he actually said that. Well, Comey, as he details it, and he tries to sugarcoat it a little bit, but he did tell Comey, or rather Comey did tell the president 3 times over the course of all those conversations that he was not a target, not a subject of the investigation, at least at the time that he talked. So the president has been borne out there. On the other hand, I want to say about those interviews, the president really can get himself in a jam in those interviews, because if you remember, just before the Lester Holt interview, which was, I believe, the day after Comey was fired, the story that was coming out of the White House and that the president had cited was this all was a response to the unhappiness with Comey inside the Justice Department, specifically that really quite tough memo that had been written by the Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein. And then in his interview with Lester Holt, the president said, well, no, I was thinking about Russia when I made the decision. So we could talk about what crisis management there should be for the president. I disagree, incidentally, respectfully, with Dana on the idea that Comey, or rather the president, should go out to a construction site. That's what her role was as a press secretary. My role as a White House correspondent, the first line of my script would have been trying to distract attention from the hearing.
But the picture's the only thing that matters.
Made an effort.
But the picture matters a lot. The visual, the whole communication. Remember Ronald Reagan?
We trashed the picture. I don't know, Dana. I'm not sure about that. But in any case, if I were going to give one piece of advice, and I'm not supposed to as a reporter to the White House, it would be stay off Twitter. Don't make any comments today. I agree with you completely. The Kasowitz's statement, the chief lawyers yesterday, taking yes for an answer and saying he was completely exonerated by Comey. That's the way to go. But if the president tries to fire back, all he does is enlarge the testimony and give even more legs to a story that's already a centipede.
Interesting stuff. Dana, Chris, Brett, stand by. The judge is coming up in a moment here. Talk about more about the legal aspects here. Chief White House correspondent John Roberts on the North Lawn there. Let's go for the latest and what we're getting from the West Wing. And there are no public events, right, scheduled during the first, 3.5 hours of this hearing. Is that right, John?
Yeah, nothing until a little bit later, but then he does have a schedule where he's actually leaving the White House for an event. And good morning to you, Bill. Obviously, the people here at the White House, the folks here are going to be watching very closely what happens there in the Senate Intelligence Committee. I'll give you a little bit of the backstory here. The president and his team were prepared to aggressively push back and correct the record, I'm told, on anything that James Comey might say during his testimony today. They weren't about to let him say one thing one day and then say something the other. There's also a massive rapid response operation being put together by the Republican National Committee to basically respond at a moment's notice to anything that comes out of the former FBI director's mouth. But after reading yesterday through the testimony and getting some analysis from his attorney, Mark Kasowitz, the president is said to feel much better about where things may go today. The president and his team said to be, quote, enormously relieved at what they saw. In a statement, Mark Kasowitz, who is acting as the president's outside attorney, said, quote, the president is pleased that Mr. Comey has finally publicly confirmed his private reports that the president was not under investigation in any Russia probe. The president feels completely and totally vindicated. He is eager to continue to move forward with his agenda. While Comey does corroborate the president's claim that he was not under investigation personally in the Russia probe, there's still a couple of other issues out there. Don't forget, Comey did say that he felt that the president was trying to get him to drop at least part of the Russia investigation, the part dealing with Flynn's firing and false statements he made about phone calls that he had with Kislyak. And then there was this idea that during the dinner that they had here at the White House, the president asked him for a pledge of loyalty. Comey says that happened. The president, in this interview with Judge Jeanine Pirro from May the 13th, says it didn't happen that way. Listen here.
Did you ask that question? No, I didn't. But I don't think it would be a bad question to ask. I think loyalty to the country, loyalty to the United States is important. You know, I mean, it depends on how you define loyalty. Number one. Number two, I don't know how that got there because I didn't ask that question.
Says he did not ask that question. You know, I think that there's a quote here that's probably relevant for the proceedings today, and Dana Perino will remember this well. Donald Rumsfeld said that there are known knowns, known unknowns, and unknown unknowns. And it's those unknown unknowns that the president and the White House team are watching for, because that's what could crop up under questioning after the opening statement. Bill?
Thank you, John. Scaffolding going up there at the White House, I hear, in the background behind you.
Always.
Making America great. There he is, John Roberts. Thank you for the North Lawn.
I mean, it is Infrastructure Week. So, you know, joining us now with more on this, Judge Andrew Napolitano, Fox News senior judicial analyst. All right, Judge, you've had a chance. We've all had a chance to read through it now. Even critics of the president are having to say, based on what we see so far in the Comey testimony as planned, they don't see a prima facie or what is a basic case for obstruction of justice, and they're counting that as a win.
I don't see a basic case for obstruction of justice as one would make the case before a jury if a defendant were being charged with that crime. But this is not a jury. As Chris Wallace has said, and Brett Baer a couple of times, this is essentially a political event this afternoon, or this morning, in which the Democrats will try to make the president look bad and the Republicans will try to make the president look good, and each of them can find something that is helpful to their case in James Comey's written statement. But in about an hour, that statement will be history, and we will be falling on every word that comes out of his mouth in the rough and tumble of questions. So we don't know where the questions are going to go. We don't know what surprises he may have in store. We don't know if we're going to see the Jim Comey who used to lecture the Congress on the meaning of federal law, or if we're just going to see a reluctant, reticent fact witness. I, again, agreeing with Chris Wallace, think we're going to see a fairly aggressive Jim Comey who wants to burnish his own legacy in what may be his last great public moment, and who has no wish to help the man who humiliated him by firing him in the manner in which he did.
Okay, famed attorney and law professor Alan Dershowitz in part had to say this. Many Trump opponents were hoping that the Comey statement would provide smoking guns. It has not. Instead, it has weakened an already weak case for obstruction of justice. We talked about the preview we've gotten of the ranking member, Democrat Mark Warner's statements. I mean, he remains unconvinced at this point, but you're saying it doesn't even necessarily matter at this point of whether, you know, someone's going to take this down and file it at the courthouse and go after the president. It's really more about public perception.
It is exactly.
And Comey knows that.
Yes, it is exactly about public perception. And again, my buddy Chris Wallace has articulated those memorable one-liners from the famous and infamous nationally televised hearings, as this one will be. That's probably what will stick. Now, who's going to have that one-liner, Senator Warner or Jim Comey? And as for what Alan Dershowitz said, again, I agree. But also, remember, this is not an indictment. This is not an appellate court before which a conviction for obstruction of justice is being appealed. The question is, did Donald Trump say what he said to Jim Comey for a noble purpose or for a corrupt purpose? On that fine line, the truth will rest.
And we will see very pointed questioning on that today, sir. Thank you, Judge.
Great group with us. Don't go anywhere, Judge. 31 minutes away. Stick with us throughout the morning and later this evening for full coverage of what happens today. Special primetime lineup, full in-depth analysis. Tucker Carlson, The Five, Hannity, all at their normal times in prime time, and then a special hour of Tucker Carlson, 11 p.m. Eastern Time. Brett will anchor a midnight edition of Special Report, so get comfortable, folks. Here we go. More on the big story of the day, moments away. We're now 30 minutes away from James Comey arriving in that room. How did we get to this point? A look at some of the big moments that propelled us toward today's testimony. Plus, thoughts from West Virginia Democratic Senator Joe Manchin on what he will ask today, and analysis from House Oversight Committee Chair Jason Chaffetz, both live minutes away.
The blockbuster hearing everyone is waiting for just minutes away. Millions of viewers expected when senators fired FBI Director James Comey, grilling him about the Russia investigation and his interactions with President Trump. Mr. Comey, no stranger to controversy, jumping into the headlines during the presidential campaign more than once. So how'd we get here? Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel lays it all out for us. Hello, Mike.
Good morning, Shannon. It's been a very long road for former FBI Director James Comey, leading to this moment as the nation awaits his testimony. Comey lost his job about a month ago after becoming a very controversial figure in the heat of the 2016 campaign.
We are expressing to justice our view that no charges are appropriate in this case.
From closing the investigation into Hillary Clinton's mishandling of classified information,
a presidential campaign for the ages has taken an even more bizarre turn than anyone could have ever predicted.
to the shocking decision to tell Congress just days before the election that the FBI was opening it again. After a Trump victory, questions continue to swirl about ties between the campaign and Russia, with the Director of National Intelligence releasing a report that concluded hacking had taken place, quote, to help President-elect Trump's election chances. Weeks later, Mr. Trump lavished praise on then FBI Director Comey.
Oh, there's James. He's become more famous than me.
But behind closed doors, things soon took a turn. Reports surfaced of a meeting between the president and Comey in which Mr. Trump asked Comey to drop the investigation into Mike Flynn, who had submitted his resignation as National Security Advisor. A Comey-written memo of the encounter recalled the president telling him, quote, I hope you can see your way clear to letting this go, to letting Flynn go. He's a good guy. I hope you can let this go. In March testimony, Comey confirmed that the FBI was investigating the Russian government's efforts to interfere in the 2016 election.
That includes investigating the nature of any links between individuals associated with the Trump campaign and the Russian government, and whether there was any coordination between the campaign and Russia's efforts.
As the investigation continued, Comey came under fire for his decision to reopen the probe into Clinton right before Election Day.
Look, this was terrible. It makes me mildly nauseous to think that we might have had some impact on the election, but honestly, it wouldn't change the decision.
A week later, Comey was out.
The biggest story of the day, without question, President Trump firing the FBI Director James Comey.
In a letter dismissing Comey, Mr. Trump wrote, quote, I greatly appreciate you informing me on 3 separate occasions that I am not under investigation. The very next day, the president met with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and Russian Ambassador Sergei Kislyak at the White House. In an interview with NBC News, defended his decision to fire Comey, calling links between his team and Russia a made-up story.
Did anyone from the White House ask him to end the investigation?
No, why would we do that?
Any surrogates on behalf of the White House?
Not that I know of. Look, I want to find out if there was a problem with an election having to do with Russia, or, by the way, anybody else, any other country.
The president then took to Twitter, ramping up his rhetoric, writing, James Comey better hope that there are no tapes of our conversations before he starts leaking to the press. And he denied reports alleging that he'd revealed classified information to the Russians during their Oval Office meeting, turning the tables back on Comey, stating, I have been asking Director Comey and others from the beginning of my administration to find the leakers in the intelligence community. Former FBI Director Robert Mueller was appointed to oversee the Russia probe.
There is no collusion between certainly myself and my campaign, but I can always speak for myself and the Russians, zero.
And now the president awaits Comey's testimony along with the rest of the country.
President, what message do you have to Jim Comey ahead of his testimony?
I wish him luck. Thank you, everybody.
Some critics have suggested James Comey is a showboat. The stage is his today. Shannon.
And the world is watching. All right, Mike Emanuel live for us on Capitol Hill. Thank you, Mike.
Let's bring in Democratic Senator Joe Manchin out of West Virginia on the Hill. You're asking questions, sir, and good morning to you, and thank you for your time before this hearing begins. Good morning,
Good morning,
there, sir.
Bill. It's going to be a busy day.
Yes, it will be. That room was buzzing at 8:30 Eastern Time, 90 minutes before it even begins. So this is what you have to walk into. Sir, what is your first question?
My first question is, Mr. Comey, what would you recommend us do? What direction would you take on this, and why were you fired?
Okay, and your expectation on that goes where?
I don't think we're going to get many answers in an open session. I'll be honest with you, Bill. I think we're going to get more in the closed session this afternoon, and we've got to give the people the confidence that this committee of ours, the Senate Intelligence Committee, is going to get to the bottom of it.
Well, if that's the case, then, Senator, how much does today matter?
Well, today does matter. I mean, there's going to be his testimony, and his opening statement has already been unprecedented. It's been given a day before. I've not seen that happen before. That might set the stage. Who knows? He might go further into his thought process and what happened and what he was thinking. The question was asked by people back in West Virginia. If you were concerned, if you had all these concerns and unprecedented, you start writing all these notes, why didn't you act upon it? Why did you just hold that and file it away? For what purpose? So there's an awful lot of questions that need to be answered.
Very interesting. You know, Bob Mueller's doing his own work, and I come back to my previous question. How much does today matter when you know Mueller is doing that?
Well, Mueller, I think we all have confidence. Democrats and Republicans are all agreeing on Bob Mueller's the right person. He'll do his job, and I think he'll do it thoroughly. He won't let this whole charade or this whole circus that we have right now going on interfere with his doing his due diligence.
No. Does this look like obstruction of justice to you? Yes or no, Senator?
I'm not going there. I'm not going there at all on obstruction of justice. I want to see the facts. I want to make sure that people know that we have a legitimate government. Our president is looking out for the best and welfare and well-being of our country. If not, he understands, and we all understand, the rule of law is something we have different. The Constitution is something we take an oath to, and everyone is going to be held accountable. And we're going to make sure that's done. But this is not a witch hunt. I'm not going to partake in that. And there will be a time, Bill, in the Intelligence Committee of the Senate that I've got to sign off on a report. After we're finished, I've got to sign off. Is it factual? Is it accurate? Does it reflect what we know? And if I think it's done in a proper manner, and I'll sign off. If not, I won't.
Now, two more questions for you. Anna McCabe, about a month ago, May 11th, on the Hill, acting FBI director, on whether or not anyone was getting in their way, including the White House. He said this.
There has been no effort to impede our investigation to date. Quite simply put, sir, you cannot stop the men and women of the FBI from doing the right thing, protecting the American people, and upholding the Constitution.
So that's under oath from about a month ago, no effort. What does that tell you about the big picture then?
Well, what that tells me is that what I've always believed about our law enforcement agencies and our intel community. They'll do their job. These are professionals, and let them do the job. We've got everybody else weighing in right now that doesn't have access to the same information. There's an ongoing investigation. The Russians have been involved. We know that. That's undisputed right now. To what extent they tried to intervene in our election, and we want to know why. Was anyone else involved? Was the president involved? We want to clear this up. We want to get this cleared up and go on to more important things that we have.
I apologize for the interruption on that, but I got to squeeze in one final question here. You've seen a lot more than we know. Based on what you have seen, was there collusion in this election of 2016 or not?
You mean directly from the president?
Yes.
We have not seen that.
Sir, thank you for your time. We'll see you in the room there in 18 minutes, okay?
Thank you.
Joe Manchin from West Virginia. Appreciate it. Shannon.
We are just moments away. The former FBI director fired by the president begins his testimony on the events that led up to that dismissal.
We will talk to House Oversight Committee Chair Congressman Jason Chaffetz on what he thinks today's dramatic day will bring. 10 o'clock in the morning, 15 minutes away from the start of this hearing in which the FBI director, now terminated, James Comey, will deliver his statement, followed by hours, potentially hours, and fireworks after that between the panel there in the Senate Intelligence Committee. Catherine Herridge is in the hearing room. She sends us this. Sources close to the president report the following. The president has read the Comey prepared testimony, 7 pages in length, disputes key elements of that testimony, which elements we do not know just yet, and we do expect a statement from the president today after the hearing wraps. What time is that? We will have to find out together. Congressman Jason Chaffetz, chairman of the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee with us here in New York. And sir, good morning to you. You've been in these hearing rooms of great significance in our country's history over the past several years. Where do you think we are now as we go into the testimony to be read by James Comey?
Well, I think actually the president's in pretty good shape. Yesterday, he had 4 of the top intelligence officers say there's been no political pressure. Mr. Comey himself, back in May, testified there had been no political pressure. The acting director of the FBI said that he's seen no political pressure. The testimony more corroborates the president in what he said in the past than not.
What is your expectation, if that's your read today, where we are on this story tonight? Do Republicans believe the White House and Democrats believe members of the committee?
Well, look, I think that Democrats are desperate to create some sort of firestorm. They've been claiming for months, as the mainstream media, that there are all kinds of scandal here, and they're throwing out words like Watergate and whatnot. But, where are all the corrections in the newspaper? I mean, how many times did we read that Comey was going to say or do something only to have that just totally blown out of the water by Comey's own written word that came out yesterday? I think they're really going to struggle with this because they don't really have many facts on their side.
According to the testimony here that James Comey will deliver, he contacted the then acting Deputy Attorney General, Dana Bente, for guidance on this. And he waited a minimum of 14 days for a response and never got one. That's him going to the Department of Justice and looking for an answer or some guidance. And apparently that guidance did not come, and then I believe it was 2 weeks after that. So you have a period of 4 weeks up to a month where he requested some guidance and it was not given. What does that mean in terms of urgency that he was looking for to give him an idea of how he should conduct his job?
First thing is, where are all these memos that he supposedly wrote? I think if you're actually going to do some proper questioning, you actually need to look at the memos, because that is supposedly what's happening in real time, and we haven't yet seen those memos yet. Number 2, who else did he tell within the Department of Justice? Why didn't he come to the House or Senate? There are plenty of avenues. Who did he talk to within the organization if this was so problematic? But again, at the end of the day, you still go back to the May testimony and say, well, there obviously wasn't much of a problem, and now we have somebody who got fired from his job.
What was the May testimony? Was that McKay?
Well, no, but May was when you actually had the FBI director say that there was no political pressure put on. He was asked very specifically, and if you go back and actually play that video, look at the tape, he basically says, no, there would have been significant, but it did not happen.
All right, this is Senator Mark Warner, the ranking Democrat on the committee. He's arriving now. So is Senator Marco Rubio, the Republican from Florida. They will both be asking questions today. When you are in this arena as a lawmaker, how do you best prepare to capitalize on your set of questions?
You really need to listen to what he said, because it's usually not the written testimony. Mr. Comey is an expert in opening statements. He usually does it without a single note in front of him. He's very precise in his comments, but you really need to listen. It's the follow-up questions, the people that are actually further down on the dais that have the biggest opportunities to capitalize and look at what's happening and then go back and say, but didn't earlier you say this? It's the second and third round questions that I think are really the most interesting.
Last question for you then. What are you listening for specifically when we begin?
Well, again, I want to know where those documents are. I think the tone and tenor in which he approaches this, how did he take what what the president supposedly said to him. But again, even if it's exactly verbatim the way Mr. Comey wrote it out, I don't think the president did anything wrong. He probably should have maybe done a little bit differently, but did it rise to the level of obstruction of justice? No, not at all.
Thank you for your time. Jason Chaffetz, the Republican from Utah. They're in Washington, D.C. Thank you, sir. Shannon.
And our all-star team is back. Brett Baer, anchor of Special Report. Chris Wallace, anchor of Fox News Sunday. And Dana Perino, co-host of The Five and former White House press secretary under President George W. Bush. Chris, I want to start with you. There are a number of lawyers on this committee today. You saw them in action yesterday. We talked to Jim Risch, GOP senator, earlier. He was a prosecutor. I mean, the way that they're going to go after this today could be very precise. We know a lot of strategy. James Comey, also a very skilled attorney himself. Who are you going to be watching for today?
Both sides. And again, as we've been saying, you just don't know that moment. It's like a presidential debate. It's very seldom planned, but there's one moment that will be the main news clip today, and that could have a lot of impact on how the story plays. I will say this about James Comey. He is a very effective witness. One case back in 2007, he testified about an incident that had happened 3 years earlier when the domestic surveillance program, the wiretap program, was about to expire, and people in the Justice Department did not want to renew it. The Attorney General, John Ashcroft, was in the hospital. He was having gallbladder surgery, and he had turned over his job to his deputy, who happened to be James Comey. There ended up being this confrontation, high-drama confrontation in Ashcroft's hospital room between the White House Chief of Staff, Andy Card, this is for the George W. Bush administration, Alberto Gonzales, who was then the White House counsel, and Comey. And Comey and Ashcroft then prevailed. 3 years later, Gonzales is now the Attorney General. 3 years later, Comey tells this story before a Senate committee, and it helped lead to Gonzales being forced out as Attorney General. So, look, it'll be very interesting to see. This is going to be a test of will. We've heard from Republicans and Democrats into the run-up so far today, and they're going to be asking very different questions, pushing very different narratives, but don't expect James Comey to be pushed around. He'll tell the story he wants to tell.
And Brett, you brought up something earlier today that we had talked about. The fact that there was a so-called Comey associate who said shortly after he was fired that it was, quote, literally farcical, that Comey would have told the president, hey, you're not directly under investigation. This isn't about you. And yet, before he even sits down in that chair, we have the written testimony where he lays out the 3 times he told him, you're not. And the first time he says was completely unprompted by the president. It was Comey's decision to do that. The White House feeling very vindicated, at least on that point today.
And several others. I mean, there were anonymous sources who reported other things, and media rolled with it and said, this is what Comey is going to say. And he doesn't say it in the testimony. Shannon, I want to point out that the president, we're told, is going to watch the testimony in this little room. It's a dining room just off the Oval Office. He has installed about a 60-inch television there. And it is a place where he is going to watch with his legal team, his outside legal counsel, the testimony of the former FBI director. This was a place where he told, he brought in the Time magazine reporters and told them, you know, he's got a DVR there, and it was the most important invention ever because he can go back and see all of these different shows and watch them. Now he's going to watch real time. We don't know if he's going to tweet real time in response to Comey, but a couple of sources are saying that just reading the testimony with his outside lawyers, that there is already dispute on different quotes. Did not say that, and language used there was not even remotely close. And to Congressman Jason Chaffetz's point at the end of your interview there, remember, this is still he said, and while Comey does contemporaneously write that down as he says after these events and has these memos and he's compiling it for the opening statement, there is still another side to this story on those conversations, and it's already being pushed back by the president and his legal team.
And Dana, Brett lays out a visual for us there of the president sitting in that dining room with the TV, ready to go, ready to watch. He's different than any other president we've ever had before. This White House is different than any other. They all are. But Dana, what is the mood like at the White House on a day like this when there's so much potentially at stake?
Well, I think that one thing you try to do is you wake up every day when you work at a White House and you intend to be really proactive for whatever is on your to-do list. And inevitably something happens and your attention gets diverted. What the chief of staff really should have done today, and from the president, is to tell the staff, go about your business. We've got it covered on the Russia thing. Of course, you're going to read the hearings and stuff, but don't be obsessed with it. We need you to be doing the work on behalf of the American people, because that's where your focus should be. I expect that there will be a lot of comparisons today to even previous tweets from the president. For example, when Bill Clinton met with Loretta Lynch, the then Attorney General, on the tarmac in Arizona. That was big news, and for good reason, because it felt so inappropriate. President Trump agreed at that time. I'm sure that what you'll see today is that some of the members of the Senate will try to ask James Comey about points where he could show some hypocrisy, because the Democrats know that they don't have some sort of smoking gun here. That's not going to happen today. A Democrat described it to me yesterday as that they feel like this is just putting another log on the fire. They think this is actually going to be long and drawn out, which is not welcome news for a White House. But I think that they would just have to deal with the cards that they have been given and try to focus on some of the other things. As I said, the Senate Republicans are actually moving forward on legislation, and the Democrats are sort of ceding that ground and letting them basically write bills, get things done, and the president will be able to claim some of those victories by the fall, maybe even before August recess.
All right, Dana, Brett, and Chris, stick around. You'll be part of our extended coverage as we all watch this thing unfold. We'll get back to you shortly.
Brett mentioned it. Let's get to Catherine Harris for more now on what we're getting from the White House and your sources there. Catherine, what have you heard as of this hour?
Well, thank you, Bill, and good morning. Along with my colleague, Chief White House Correspondent John Roberts, we've confirmed through two separate sources that President Trump has reviewed the prepared testimony for the fired FBI Director James Comey, and that he does dispute key elements of that testimony. The first dispute centers on this January 17th dinner at the White House, at the Green Room, where the two men were dining alone. And the statement James Comey makes is that there was a pledge of loyalty. We are told through two separate sources that the president disputes that he asked for a pledge of loyalty from James Comey at that meeting. The second dispute centers around this Oval Office meeting in mid-February, one day after National Security Advisor Mike Flynn was fired, and the president disputes that he asked then FBI Director James Comey to let this matter go. What we're told specifically is that, quote, the language used was not remotely close to what is in that prepared testimony, and we're told to expect some kind of statement on this matter after the hearing wraps. So the main headline is that two separate sources have told myself and John Roberts that the president's looked at this testimony, and he does dispute key elements of what Comey will say this morning, just a short time from now, Bill.
More to come. Thank you, Catherine Harris, inside the hearing room. We will be back with you, certainly, as we watch the room fill up. And many of these players, the senators, you've seen them on television, some in some cases for several years. They will be quite familiar to you. Others perhaps not. But as we go throughout the day here, we will see what the objective is on behalf of Democrats and Republicans on this committee and what they make their priority. It is 10 o'clock on the East Coast. I'm Bill Hemmer along with Shannon Bream, and our special coverage continues now here on America's Newsroom. And Shannon, good morning to you.
Good morning. I would say one of the folks I would keep an eye on is a freshman senator, Kamala Harris. She's a Democrat out of California. She was the Attorney General. She had some very tough questioning yesterday and got in a little bit of a dust-up with the chair of the committee, who said, hey, you got to let people answer the question.
There she is right there,
I would think that we will see a lot and hear a lot from her today.
Senator Feinstein as well. Marco Rubio was quite enhanced with his delivery yesterday. We'll see what Tom Cotton out of Arkansas does. John Cornyn, who was considered to lead the FBI, at least for a minute, we believe, some months ago, was on that committee as well. So approaching the top of the hour, 10 o'clock East Coast time, as our coverage continues right now. This is a Fox News alert, and we are moments away from James Comey entering that room. We believe he left his home in McLean, Virginia, about 8:50 a.m. Eastern time. That's about an hour and 10 minutes ago. The maps indicated it was about a 37-minute drive. We can do that now with technology, believe it or not. We believe he has arrived there on the Hill, and you will see him momentarily. He will begin after opening statements by the ranking members here. Richard Burr, the Republican from North Carolina. He's the chairman. Mark Warner, the Democrat from Virginia, will read an opening statement as well. Then James Comey is set to detail the 7-page letter that went public yesterday. That will begin at Trump Tower on January 6th of this year, face to face. Then he'll move to a dinner in the green room of the White House on January 27th. After that, he'll move to a meeting on February 14th. Valentine's Day in the Oval Office, again, a face-to-face meeting. Following that, we'll get details on a phone call from the 30th of March at the FBI from the president. Then on the 11th of April, another phone call on that morning with the FBI director, who is now terminated. What we do not have details on, however, are at least 4 other interactions that he says they had over a period of 4 months. He said 9 in total, 3 in person, 6 on the phone. This testimony would indicate there are 5 of those encounters that we'll hear about, which leaves 4 others. And what was said then, we'll have to find out together.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see if there are memos for those interactions, because we've heard a lot about this, and, you know, the FBI, former FBI director, has confirmed